The fluorescent lights of Murphy's diner buzzed overhead as Rebecca Walsh wiped down the last table of her evening shift. It was October 14th, 1994, and the small-town diner in Cedar Falls, Iowa, was nearly empty except for old Pete nursing his fourth cup of coffee at the corner booth. At 20 years old, Rebecca had been working at Murphy's for 2 years, saving every penny for nursing school while living with her parents on Maple Street. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and despite the exhaustion showing in her green eyes, she managed a warm smile for Pete as she refilled his cup one last time. "You heading home soon, Becky?" Pete asked, his weathered hands wrapped around the ceramic mug. "Just finishing up, Mr. Henderson. Drive safe out there. Looks like it might rain." Outside, the October wind rattled the diner's windows, and dark clouds gathered over the small Iowa town. Rebecca had always loved autumn in Cedar Falls, the way the maple trees lined Main Street with their brilliant reds and golds, but tonight something felt different. Maybe it was the approaching storm, or maybe it was the restlessness she'd been feeling lately, the urge to break free from the routine that had defined her life since graduating high school. Before we continue with Rebecca's story, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. These mysterious disappearance cases take countless hours to research and present, and your support means everything to us. Also, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers from around the world. Now, let's get back to that fateful October evening in 1994. Rebecca hung up her apron in the small employee break room and grabbed her denim jacket from the hook by the back door. Her manager, Frank Rodriguez, was counting the till at the front counter when she called out, "I'm heading out, Frank. See you tomorrow." "Take care, Rebecca. That storm's supposed to hit around midnight." She pushed through the back door into the alley behind Murphy's, her breath visible in the crisp air. Her 1987 Honda Civic was parked under the single streetlight, keys jingling in her hand as she approached. The familiar routine of locking up the diner, walking to her car, and making the 12-minute drive home to her parents' house on Maple Street had become as natural as breathing. But tonight, Rebecca paused beside her car, looking up at the darkening sky. Her parents, David and Linda Walsh, were probably watching the evening news in their living room, waiting for her to come home so they could hear about her day. Her younger brother Tommy, 17 and a senior at Cedar Falls High, would be upstairs doing homework or talking on the phone with his girlfriend. It was a peaceful, predictable life in a town where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest excitement usually came from the high school football games on Friday nights. Rebecca slid behind the wheel of her Honda and started the engine. The radio crackled to life, playing a Sheryl Crow song that had been climbing the charts. As she pulled out of the alley onto Main Street, she noticed how empty the town looked. Most of the shops had closed hours ago, their darkened windows reflecting her headlights as she drove past. The only signs of life were the warm yellow glows coming from house windows, families settling in for the evening. She stopped at the four-way intersection at Main and Cedar, the only traffic light in town blinking yellow due to the late hour. This was where she would normally turn right to head home, but something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the conversation she'd had with her best friend Amy earlier that day about dreams and taking chances, or maybe it was just the restless energy of being 20 and feeling like life was passing her by in this small town. Instead of turning right toward Maple Street, Rebecca found herself driving straight toward the outskirts of town where the railroad tracks cut through the prairie. The Honda's headlights illuminated the empty road ahead, and she rolled down the window slightly, letting the cool October air fill the car. She'd driven this route before, sometimes when she needed to think, or when the walls of her parents' house felt too close. The railroad tracks were about 3 miles from downtown Cedar Falls, a place where freight trains passed through several times a day, connecting their small Iowa town to the wider world beyond. As she approached the railroad crossing, Rebecca could see the old grain elevator standing like a monument against the dark sky. The crossing gates were up, no train scheduled to pass for another few hours according to the timetable she'd memorized from countless trips out here. She pulled her car to a stop on the gravel shoulder beside the tracks and turned off the engine. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind rustling through the tall prairie grass and the distant sound of tree branches creaking in the approaching storm. Rebecca sat in her car for several minutes, keys still in her hand, thinking about her conversation with Amy. Her friend had been accepted to the University of Northern Iowa and would be leaving Cedar Falls after Christmas break. "You should come with me, Becky," Amy had said. "There's a whole world out there beyond Murphy's Diner." Rebecca stepped out of the car, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. The night air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of rain and dying leaves. She walked closer to the railroad tracks, the parallel steel rails stretching endlessly in both directions, disappearing into the darkness. Trains had always fascinated her, these massive machines carrying cargo and passengers to destinations she could only imagine. Chicago, Denver, Seattle. Cities where a 20-year-old girl could disappear into the crowd and reinvent herself completely. She stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, lost in thought about her future, about the choices that lay ahead. The storm clouds were moving closer now, and she could see flashes of lightning on the horizon. It was time to head home before her parents started worrying. She walked back to her Honda, fishing her keys from her jacket pocket. But as she reached for the car door handle, she heard something that made her freeze. The distant sound of a train whistle, low and mournful, echoing across the prairie. According to the schedule, no train was supposed to come through until morning. She turned toward the sound, squinting into the darkness, and saw a single bright light approaching from the west. An unscheduled freight train, moving slowly through the night. Rebecca Walsh stood beside her car, keys in her hand, watching the approaching train with a mixture of curiosity and something she couldn't quite name. The locomotive's headlight grew brighter as it drew closer, its horns sounding again across the empty landscape. She had no way of knowing that this moment, this decision to drive out to the railroad tracks on a restless October evening, would become the last confirmed sighting of her alive. The investigation into Rebecca Walsh's disappearance began the next morning, when she failed to show up for her opening shift at Murphy's Diner. Frank Rodriguez called the Walsh house at 7:30 a.m., assuming she'd overslept, but Linda Walsh answered the phone in a panic. Rebecca's bed hadn't been slept in, and her car was nowhere to be found. David Walsh immediately called the Cedar Falls Police Department, and within an hour, the entire town was mobilized in a search effort that would consume the community for months. Chief of Police Margaret Brennan had known Rebecca since she was a little girl. Cedar Falls was that kind of town, where the police chief attended high school graduations and knew every family's story. When David and Linda Walsh arrived at the station that morning, their faces pale with worry and exhaustion from a sleepless night, Chief Brennan could see the fear in their eyes that every parent dreads. "She's never done anything like this," Linda Walsh insisted, twisting her wedding ring around her finger nervously. "Rebecca is responsible. She always calls if she's going to be late, always comes straight home after work. Something's happened to her, Margaret. I can feel it." Sadly, the search began immediately. Chief Brennan organized volunteers into teams, coordinating with the county sheriff's department and the Iowa State Police. They started with Rebecca's usual route from Murphy's Diner to the Walsh house on Maple Street, then expanded outward in concentric circles. Every ditch, every field, every abandoned building in a 20-mile radius was searched. The local newspaper, the Cedar Falls Gazette, ran Rebecca's photograph on the front page, and missing person flyers appeared on every storefront window and telephone pole in town. Amy Peterson, Rebecca's best friend, was among the first people interviewed by police. She sat in Chief Brennan's office on the second day of the search, her eyes red from crying. desperately trying to remember any detail that might help find her friend. "She seemed restless lately," Amy told the chief. "Not unhappy exactly, but like she was ready for something to change. We talked about college, about seeing more of the world, but she would never just leave without telling anyone, especially not her parents. She loved them too much." The investigation revealed Rebecca's movements on the evening of October 14th with precision. She'd clocked out of Murphy's Diner at 9:47 p.m. according to the timecard system. Frank Rodriguez confirmed she'd left through the back door around 9:50, and Pete Henderson, the last customer that night, remembered her saying goodnight. The security camera at First National Bank across from the diner showed her Honda Civic leaving the parking lot at 9:52 p.m., heading east on Main Street toward home. But Rebecca never made it home, and her car seemed to have vanished along with her. Police checked every road, every parking lot, every place a car might be hidden or abandoned. They interviewed gas station attendants, convenience store clerks, and anyone else who might have seen Rebecca or her distinctive blue Honda after she left work. The trail simply ended at 9:52 p.m. on Main Street, as if she'd driven into thin air. Tommy Walsh, Rebecca's younger brother, struggled to cope with his sister's disappearance and the chaos it brought to their previously peaceful family. The house on Maple Street, once filled with laughter and the comfortable routines of small-town life, became a command center for the search effort. Volunteers brought casseroles and offered support, while investigators came and went at all hours, asking the same questions over and over. "She was excited about something lately," Tommy told police during his interview. "I caught her looking at college brochures a few weeks ago, stuff from schools in other states. When I teased her about it, she just smiled and said she was exploring her options, but she never mentioned wanting to leave right away." As days turned into weeks, theories began to emerge. Some suggested Rebecca had run away to start a new life, overwhelmed by the pressure of small-town expectations and family obligations. Others feared something more sinister, an abduction, an accident, or worse. The lack of any evidence, any trace of Rebecca or her car, made every theory seem both possible and impossible at the same time. Detective Ray Morrison from the Iowa State Police was assigned to lead the investigation after local resources were exhausted. A 20-year veteran with experience in missing persons cases, Morrison brought a methodical approach to the search that gave the Walsh family hope. He re-interviewed everyone who had contact with Rebecca in the weeks before her disappearance, looking for patterns or details that might have been overlooked. Missing persons cases require patience and persistence, Morrison explained to the Walsh family during one of his regular updates. People don't just vanish. There's always a trail, always evidence. Sometimes it takes time to find it, but it's there. Morrison's investigation expanded beyond Cedar Falls, checking bus stations and airports in Des Moines and Chicago, following up on reported sightings that invariably led nowhere. He coordinated with police departments in surrounding states, circulating Rebecca's photograph and car description to law enforcement agencies across the Midwest. Every lead was pursued, every tip investigated, but the trail remained cold. The weather turned colder as October gave way to November, and the massive search efforts gradually scaled down. Volunteers returned to their normal lives, though many continued to keep an eye out for any sign of Rebecca or her car. The Walsh family refused to give up hope, but the strain was visible on their faces. David Walsh took leave from his job at the implement dealer to focus on the search, while Linda Walsh barely slept, jumping at every phone ring, hoping for news. Winter arrived early that year, and with it came the grim reality that Rebecca had been missing for over 2 months. The ground froze, making further searches nearly impossible, and the community began to face the possibility that they might never know what happened to the young woman who had simply vanished on an October night. Chief Brennan continued to follow up on leads, but as 1994 came to an end, Rebecca Walsh remained missing without a trace. The case officially went cold in the spring of 1995, though it was never closed. Detective Morrison was reassigned to other cases, but he kept Rebecca's file on his desk, reviewing it regularly for anything he might have missed. The Walsh family established a reward fund and continued to distribute flyers at truck stops and rest areas throughout the Midwest, clinging to the hope that someone, somewhere, had seen their daughter. Years passed, and life in Cedar Falls slowly returned to normal, though Rebecca's disappearance left a permanent scar on the community. Murphy's Diner eventually closed, and Frank Rodriguez moved away. The Walsh family remained on Maple Street, keeping Rebecca's room exactly as she'd left it, her nursing school applications still stacked neatly on her desk. Every year on October 14th, they held a vigil, and every year fewer people attended, though the core group of family and closest friends never wavered in their commitment to finding answers. The case might have remained forever unsolved, if not for a routine track maintenance operation on the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway line in March of 2020. Workers replacing a section of damaged rail near the grain elevator outside Cedar Falls made a discovery that would reignite the investigation into Rebecca Walsh's disappearance after 26 years of silence. Mario Gonzalez had been working railroad maintenance for 15 years, and he'd seen all kinds of debris along the tracks, bottles, cans, old shoes, and occasionally items that clearly had stories behind them. But when his crew was using heavy machinery to replace a damaged section of rail 3 miles east of Cedar Falls, something caught his eye that made him stop the work immediately. Partially buried in the gravel ballast between the railroad ties, tarnished green with age but still recognizable, was a set of car keys attached to a keychain in the shape of a small teddy bear. Mario had lived in Cedar Falls long enough to remember the Rebecca Walsh case, and something about the teddy bear keychain triggered a memory. His wife had mentioned years ago that the missing girl had carried keys on a distinctive teddy bear chain, a detail that had been widely reported during the initial investigation. "Hey, Bill," Mario called to his supervisor. "You need to see this." Bill Patterson, the track maintenance supervisor, examined the keys carefully before making the decision that would change everything. Instead of dismissing them as random debris, he called the Cedar Falls Police Department. Chief Brennan had retired years earlier, replaced by Chief Robert Hayes, but the Rebecca Walsh case was legendary in local law enforcement circles. Every officer knew the story, and they all understood the significance of Mario's discovery. The keys were carefully extracted and transported to the Iowa State Crime Lab for analysis. Forensic experts confirmed what everyone hoped and feared. The keys belonged to Rebecca Walsh's 1987 Honda Civic. Her parents identified the teddy bear keychain immediately. It had been a gift from her grandmother when Rebecca started driving. After 26 years of questions without answers, the first tangible clue had finally emerged. Detective Sarah Chen, now leading the Cedar Falls Police Department's Detective Division, reopened the Rebecca Walsh case with fresh eyes and modern investigative techniques. Chen had studied the original case file extensively during her training, using it as an example of how missing persons investigations had evolved over the decades. Now she had the opportunity to apply contemporary forensic science to evidence that had been waiting in the ground for more than 2 decades. The discovery of these keys changes everything, Chen explained to David and Linda Walsh, now in their 70s, but still living in the same house on Maple Street. "We can finally establish that Rebecca was at the railroad tracks the night she disappeared. This gives us a specific location to focus our investigation." The news of the key discovery spread quickly through Cedar Falls and beyond. Local media outlets picked up the story, And soon, reporters from Des Moines and Chicago were arriving in the small Iowa town, eager to cover the development in a case that had captivated the region decades earlier. The Walsh family, now including Tommy's children, who had grown up hearing stories about their missing aunt, faced renewed attention and the painful revival of old hopes and fears. Detective Chen assembled a new investigative team, combining veteran officers familiar with the original case and younger detectives trained in modern forensic techniques. They began by conducting a comprehensive search of the area around the railroad tracks where the keys were found, using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs to look for any additional evidence that might have been missed during the original investigation. The search revealed disturbing new information. Approximately 50 yards from where the keys were discovered, investigators found fabric fragments buried in the prairie grass, pieces of denim and cotton that appeared consistent with the clothing Rebecca Walsh had been wearing the night she disappeared. Forensic analysis confirmed the fibers matched the description of her jacket and jeans, providing additional confirmation that she had indeed been at the railroad tracks on October 14, 1994. But the most significant discovery came when investigators used modern database technology to research the railroad schedules from that October night 26 years earlier. Detective Chen's team contacted Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway and accessed computerized records that hadn't been available during the original investigation. What they found was startling. An unscheduled freight train had indeed passed through Cedar Falls at approximately 10:30 p.m. on October 14, 1994. The train, designated as BNSF 7421, had been carrying grain from Minnesota to terminals in Missouri when it developed mechanical problems near Cedar Falls. The crew had been forced to make an emergency stop for repairs, a delay that lasted approximately 2 hours. The train's location during this stopover placed it directly at the crossing where Rebecca's keys would later be found. This revelation opened up entirely new possibilities in Rebecca's case. Had she encountered someone associated with the train crew? Had she been in the wrong place at the wrong time when dangerous individuals were present? Or was her disappearance related to the train itself in some way that investigators had never considered? Detective Chen began the painstaking process of tracking down the crew members who had been aboard BNSF 7421 on that October night in 1994. Railroad employment records led her to William "Buck" Stevens, the train's conductor, who was now retired and living in Kansas City. When Chen contacted Stevens by phone, his reaction was immediate and troubling. "I remember that night," Stevens said, his voice tight with an emotion Chen couldn't identify. "We broke down outside Cedar Falls, had to wait for a repair crew. But there's something about that stop I've never told anyone. Something that's bothered me for 26 years. Stevens agreed to meet with Detective Chen in person, and what he revealed during that interview would finally begin to unravel the mystery of what happened to Rebecca Walsh on that dark October night beside the railroad tracks outside Cedar Falls, Iowa. Buck Stevens sat across from Detective Chen in a Kansas City police station conference room, his weathered hands folded on the table. At 68, he looked every one of his years in railroad service, with deep lines around his eyes and the cautious manner of someone carrying a long-held secret. When Chen pressed play on the digital recorder and gave him the Miranda warning as a precaution, Stevens nodded grimly. "I've been waiting for this conversation for 26 years, he said quietly. "I knew someday someone would come asking about that night." Stevens explained that BNSF 7421 had indeed broken down near Cedar Falls around 10:15 p.m. on October 14, 1994. The locomotive had developed an electrical problem that killed the engine about half a mile east of the grain elevator crossing. While the engineer, Marcus Webb, worked on repairs, Stevens had walked back along the train to check the freight cars and ensure everything was secure for what they expected to be a lengthy delay. "That's when I saw the car," Stevens continued. "A small blue Honda, parked right off the gravel road near the crossing. At first I didn't think much of it. People sometimes came out there to watch trains pass. But then I saw someone walking along the tracks, and I realized it was a young woman." Chen leaned forward, every instinct telling her this was the breakthrough the case had needed for more than 2 decades. "Tell me about the woman. What did she look like?" "Small, maybe 5'4", with reddish hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a denim jacket. She seemed curious about the train, kept walking closer even though we weren't supposed to have civilians around a disabled locomotive. I called out to her to stay back, and she waved at me like she understood." Stevens paused, his expression growing darker. "That's when I noticed we weren't alone out there. There was another vehicle parked about a quarter-mile down the road, hidden behind some equipment at the grain elevator. A dark pickup truck that I hadn't seen when I first started my walk back." The retired conductor described watching Rebecca approach the stopped train while remaining at what seemed like a safe distance. She appeared fascinated by the massive freight cars and the repair work being conducted on the locomotive. Stevens had seen plenty of railroad enthusiasts over the years, people drawn to the power and romance of the trains, and Rebecca seemed to fit that profile. But Stevens' account took a disturbing turn when he described what happened next. A man emerged from the dark pickup truck and began walking toward Rebecca. Even from a distance of several hundred yards, Stevens could tell something was wrong about the interaction. The way he moved, the way he approached her, it wasn't friendly, Stevens recalled. "I started walking in their direction, but I was pretty far away, and the train cars were between us. I called out, but with the wind and the distance, I don't think either of them heard me." Stevens described seeing Rebecca back away from the approaching man, her body language clearly indicating fear or discomfort. She began moving toward her Honda Civic, but the man continued to follow her. Stevens broke into a run, trying to reach them, but the line of freight cars blocked his direct path and forced him to run nearly half a mile around the train's rear. "By the time I got there, they were both gone," Stevens said, his voice heavy with regret. "The Honda was still there, engine running, driver's door open like she'd gotten out quickly, but there was no sign of the girl or the man from the pickup truck." Chen asked the crucial question, "Why didn't you report this to police?" Stevens's answer revealed the complexity of the situation and explained why Rebecca's case had remained unsolved for so long. "I was scared," he admitted. "See, I had a warrant out for unpaid child support in Missouri. Nothing violent, just money I owed my ex-wife. But I knew if I got involved with police, they'd arrest me and I'd lose my job with the railroad. I was a coward, and I've lived with that guilt every day since." Instead of calling police, Stevens had made a decision that would haunt him for decades. He searched the immediate area around Rebecca's car, but found no sign of her or the mysterious man. Her keys were on the ground near the driver's door, apparently dropped during whatever confrontation had taken place. Stevens picked them up, intending to leave them on the car seat, but then heard his engineer calling from the locomotive. The repairs were complete, and they needed to move the train immediately to avoid further delays. "I panicked," Stevens confessed. "I threw the keys into the gravel beside the tracks and ran back to the train. I told myself someone would find the car and call police, that it wasn't my responsibility, but I knew I was abandoning that girl, and I've never forgiven myself." Stevens' revelation provided the missing piece of Rebecca Walsh's story, but it also raised new questions. Who was the man in the pickup truck? What had happened to Rebecca after Stevens lost sight of them? And most importantly, was she still alive somewhere, or had her encounter with the unknown man ended tragically that October night? Detective Chen immediately began working with the Kansas City Police Department To verify Stephen's story and gather additional information about his background, criminal records confirmed his warrant for unpaid child support in 1994, lending credibility to his explanation for not coming forward earlier. Railroad employment records verified his presence on BNSF 7421 that night, and maintenance logs confirmed the train's breakdown and repair at the location Stevens described. Armed with this new information, Chen returned to Cedar Falls with a focused mission: identify the man in the pickup truck and determine what had happened to Rebecca Walsh after her confrontation with him at the railroad tracks. The investigation that had been cold for 26 years suddenly had new life, and for the first time since 1994, the Walsh family had reason to hope for answers. The news of Buck Stevens' confession sent shockwaves through Cedar Falls and reignited the Rebecca Walsh investigation with unprecedented intensity. Detective Chen assembled a task force that included investigators from the Iowa State Police, FBI behavioral analysts, and cold case specialists from across the region. The small police department in Cedar Falls had never handled anything approaching this level of complexity, but Chen was determined to finally bring closure to the case that had haunted the community for more than 2 decades. Chen's first priority was creating a profile of the unknown man Stevens had seen at the railroad tracks. Working with FBI behavioral analyst Dr. James Mitchell, they developed a description based on Stevens's recollections and the probable circumstances of Rebecca's disappearance. The man was likely local or familiar with the area, given his knowledge of the secluded location near the grain elevator. He would have been an adult male in 1994, probably between 25 and 50 years old, driving a dark-colored pickup truck. This wasn't a random encounter, Dr. Mitchell explained to the task force. The suspect chose a location where he expected to be alone with the victim. The fact that he approached Rebecca, despite the presence of a stopped train, suggests either desperation or confidence that he wouldn't be identified. This indicates either a first-time offender taking enormous risks or someone who had successfully committed similar crimes before. The task force began systematically reviewing police records from 1994, looking for any reports of suspicious activity, attempted assaults, or other crimes that might be connected to Rebecca's disappearance. They also expanded their search to include surrounding counties, recognizing that the perpetrator might not have been from Cedar Falls itself. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Officer Janet Morrison, a rookie patrolman in 1994, who was now a sergeant with the Cedar Falls Police Department, remembered responding to a complaint about suspicious activity near the grain elevator just 2 weeks before Rebecca's disappearance. A local farmer named Harold Bennett had called to report seeing a pickup truck parked behind the grain elevator on multiple evenings, with someone using binoculars to watch the railroad tracks. "I drove out there on October 1st, 1994, Morrison recalled during a task force meeting. Found tire tracks in the mud behind the elevator, but whoever it was had left by the time I arrived. Harold said he'd seen the truck there at least 3 or 4 times that month, always in the evening around the time the freight trains usually passed through." This information suggested Rebecca's encounter at the railroad tracks wasn't random. Someone had been stalking that location for weeks, possibly watching for the right opportunity to strike. The tire track evidence from 1994 was long gone, but Harold Bennett, now 82 and still living on his farm adjacent to the grain elevator, provided additional details that helped focus the investigation. "It was a dark pickup, maybe black or dark blue," Bennett told Detective Chen. "Looked like it might have been from the early 1990s, one of those square-body Chevrolets or GMCs. I never got close enough to see the license plate, but I remember thinking it was odd that someone would park back there so many times. There's nothing to see except trains, and most railroad enthusiasts park right by the crossing where they get a better view." Bennett's description of the vehicle and its repeated presence at the location supported the theory that Rebecca had been targeted by someone who had carefully planned her abduction. The task force began searching motor vehicle registration records from 1994, looking for owners of dark pickup trucks in the region who might match their suspect profile. The investigation took another significant turn when Detective Chen decided to re-examine the physical evidence from the original case using modern forensic techniques. The fabric fragments found near where Rebecca's keys had been buried were subjected to advanced DNA analysis that hadn't been available in the 1990s. While the samples were degraded after 26 years in the ground, forensic scientists were able to extract partial DNA profiles that didn't match Rebecca or any members of her family. "We have DNA evidence from an unknown male," Chen announced to the Walsh family during a tense meeting in the police station conference room. "It's not enough for a direct comparison, but if we identify a suspect, we can use it to confirm involvement in Rebecca's disappearance." The DNA evidence transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into a probable homicide. While the Walsh family had never given up hope that Rebecca might still be alive somewhere, the physical evidence suggested a more tragic outcome. David and Linda Walsh, now in their mid-70s, struggled to process the implications while maintaining their dignity and composure in the face of overwhelming grief. Tommy Walsh, now 43 with children of his own, became the family's primary liaison with law enforcement. He had spent his adult life wondering what had happened to his sister, and the new developments brought both relief at finally having answers and anguish over what those answers suggested. "We've always known, deep down, that she was gone," Tommy told reporters gathered outside the Cedar Falls Police Department. "Rebecca would never have chosen to disappear and put our family through this pain. But knowing and having it confirmed are different things. At least now we might finally learn the truth about what happened to her." The task force expanded their investigation to include a comprehensive review of unsolved crimes throughout Iowa and surrounding states during the mid-1990s. If Rebecca's abductor was a serial offender, there might be other cases with similar patterns or evidence. This approach led them to examine 3 unsolved disappearances of young women in rural Iowa between 1992 and 1996. All involving victims who had vanished near railroad tracks or grain elevators. Detective Chen coordinated with investigators from these other cases, sharing information and looking for connections. While none of the other cases had witnesses like Buck Stevens or physical evidence like Rebecca's keys, there were troubling similarities in the circumstances and locations of the disappearances. The investigation also benefited from advances in digital technology that allowed investigators to create detailed timeline maps showing the movements of trains, vehicles, and individuals on the night of Rebecca's disappearance. By combining railroad records, weather data, and witness statements, they were able to establish a precise sequence of events that painted the clearest picture yet of what had happened at the railroad crossing on October 14, 1994. According to the reconstructed timeline, Rebecca had arrived at the railroad crossing around 10:15 p.m., just as BNSF 7421 was experiencing mechanical problems. The unknown suspect had already been positioned behind the grain elevator, possibly waiting for an opportunity to approach someone at the isolated location. Rebecca's decision to get out of her car and walk toward the stopped train had made her an easy target for an individual who had likely been stalking the area for weeks. As 2020 progressed toward its end, the task force had assembled the most complete picture of Rebecca Walsh's disappearance that had ever existed. They had identified the likely sequence of events, established the presence of an unknown suspect, and developed both physical and circumstantial evidence that could support prosecution. But they still faced the most challenging aspect of any cold case investigation: identifying and locating the perpetrator after more than a quarter century. The breakthrough that would finally solve Rebecca's case came from an unexpected direction, involving a confession that would shock the Cedar Falls community and reveal how close the truth had been hiding all along. In December 2020, as investigators continued their exhaustive search for Rebecca Walsh's abductor, an unrelated arrest in a neighboring county would finally provide the answers that had eluded them for 26 years. Gerald Hutchinson, a 58-year-old mechanic from Waverly, Iowa, was arrested for the attempted assault of a young woman in a parking lot behind a grocery store. The victim had fought off her attacker and provided police with a detailed description that led to Hutchinson's quick apprehension. During the booking process, Officer Lisa Chen, no relation to Detective Sarah Chen, noticed that Hutchinson owned a 1992 dark blue Chevrolet pickup truck that matched the general description from the Rebecca Walsh investigation. More significantly, when she ran Hutchinson's background check, she discovered he had lived in Cedar Falls from 1991 to 1998, working as a mechanic at Morrison's Auto Repair just 3 blocks from Murphy's Diner. Detective Sarah Chen was contacted immediately, and when she reviewed Hutchinson's background, the connections to Rebecca's case became undeniable. In 1994, Hutchinson would have been 32 years old, fitting the age profile developed by FBI analysts. His job at Morrison's Auto Repair would have made him familiar with Rebecca's work schedule at Murphy's Diner, as the two businesses were in the same commercial district. Most importantly, his residence in 1994 had been on rural Route 4, less than 2 miles from the grain elevator where Rebecca had disappeared. Chen obtained a search warrant for Hutchinson's current residence and his 1992 pickup truck, which was still registered in his name after nearly 3 decades. The search revealed items that would prove crucial to solving Rebecca's case. A small wooden box hidden in Hutchinson's bedroom containing jewelry and personal items that appeared to be trophies from multiple victims. Among the items in the box was a gold necklace with a small cross pendant that Linda Walsh immediately identified as belonging to Rebecca. The necklace had been a confirmation gift from Rebecca's grandmother, and Linda had provided police with a detailed description during the original investigation. Seeing her daughter's necklace after 26 years brought Linda to her knees in the police station, overwhelmed by grief and the terrible confirmation of what she had long suspected. But the most damning evidence came from the DNA analysis of items found in Hutchinson's truck. Despite being nearly 30 years old, the vehicle had been meticulously maintained, and forensic scientists were able to extract DNA samples from multiple locations inside the cab. The partial DNA profile developed from the fabric fragments found near Rebecca's keys was a match for genetic material found on the truck's seat covers and door handles. Confronted with the physical evidence linking him to Rebecca's disappearance, Gerald Hutchinson initially maintained his innocence. But as Detective Chen presented the timeline of evidence, his presence in Cedar Falls in 1994, his ownership of a vehicle matching witness descriptions, the DNA evidence, and Rebecca's necklace found in his possession, Hutchinson's composure began to crack. The interrogation lasted 12 hours over 2 days, with Hutchinson alternating between denial, silence, and partial admissions. Finally, faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of facing capital murder charges, he agreed to provide a full confession in exchange for a plea agreement that would spare him the death penalty. Hutchinson's confession, recorded on video and witnessed by his attorney, revealed the horrific details of what had happened to Rebecca Walsh on that October night in 1994. He admitted to stalking the railroad crossing for weeks, looking for isolated victims who might stop to watch the trains. He had noticed Rebecca driving to the location on previous evenings and had been waiting for the right opportunity to approach her. "I saw her car that night when the train broke down," Hutchinson confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. She got out to look at the train, and I thought this was my chance. I approached her, told her I was having car trouble and needed help, but she got scared and started backing away toward her car. According to Hutchinson's confession, Rebecca had dropped her keys while trying to retreat to her Honda Civic. When she bent to pick them up, he grabbed her and forced her into his pickup truck. He drove her to an abandoned farm building about 15 miles from Cedar Falls, where he assaulted and murdered her. Her body was buried in a remote wooded area that Hutchinson agreed to show investigators as part of his plea agreement. The confession brought a mixture of relief and devastation to the Walsh family. After 26 years of wondering, they finally had answers, but those answers confirmed their worst fears about Rebecca's fate. The knowledge that she had died alone and terrified at the hands of a stranger who had stalked her was almost unbearable for her parents and brother. In February 2021, Gerald Hutchinson led investigators to the location where he had buried Rebecca Walsh's remains. The site was a heavily wooded area on private land in rural Black Hawk County, approximately 30 miles from where she had disappeared. Recovery efforts took several days, but forensic anthropologists were able to locate and excavate Rebecca's remains, finally bringing her home after more than 2 decades. The discovery of Rebecca's body provided the final piece of evidence needed to ensure Hutchinson's conviction. DNA analysis confirmed the remains were those of Rebecca Walsh, and forensic examination revealed evidence consistent with Hutchinson's confession about the circumstances of her death. On June 15, 2021, Gerald Hutchinson pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Rebecca Walsh was finally laid to rest in Cedar Falls Cemetery on a beautiful autumn day in October 2021, exactly 27 years after her disappearance. The funeral was attended by hundreds of community members who had never forgotten the 20-year-old nursing student who had vanished on her way home from work. Her headstone bears a simple inscription chosen by her family: Rebecca Marie Walsh, beloved daughter and sister. Her light still shines. The resolution of Rebecca's case brought closure to her family and the Cedar Falls community, but it also highlighted how advances in forensic science and investigative techniques could solve even the coldest cases. Detective Sarah Chen received commendations from the Iowa State Police and the FBI for her persistent work on the investigation. Though she always insisted that the real heroes were the Walsh family members who never gave up hope and the community that never forgot Rebecca. Buck Stevens, the former railroad conductor whose delayed confession had provided the crucial breakthrough in the case, attended Rebecca's funeral despite his advanced age and failing health. He approached David and Linda Walsh afterward, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner," he told them quietly. "I was selfish and scared, and my silence cost your family 26 years of not knowing. I hope someday you can forgive an old fool who waited too long to do the right thing." Linda Walsh, showing the grace and strength that had sustained her family through decades of uncertainty, took Stephen's hands in hers. "You told the truth when it mattered most," she said. "Without your testimony, we might never have found her. Thank you for finally bringing our daughter home." The Rebecca Walsh case became a landmark investigation in Iowa law enforcement, demonstrating how persistence, modern technology, and community cooperation could solve even the most challenging cold cases. Detective Chen used the case as a teaching tool at police training seminars, emphasizing the importance of preserving evidence, maintaining detailed records, and never giving up on victims and their families. Today, a memorial garden behind Murphy's former location serves as a reminder of Rebecca Walsh and her impact on the Cedar Falls community. The garden, maintained by volunteers and funded by donations, features native Iowa prairie plants and a simple bench where visitors can sit and remember a young woman whose life was cut tragically short but whose memory continues to inspire those who knew her story. David and Linda Walsh, now in their late 70s, still live in the same house on Maple Street where they raised Rebecca and Tommy. Rebecca's room has been converted into a quiet study where Linda volunteers for victim advocacy organizations, using her experience to help other families navigate the devastating aftermath of violent crime. They take comfort in knowing that their daughter's case led to improvements in how missing persons investigations are conducted, and that her story might prevent other families from enduring the same anguish they experienced. The keys that were found buried beside the railroad tracks, the keys that finally led investigators to the truth about Rebecca Walsh's disappearance, are preserved as evidence in the Iowa State Crime Lab. They serve as a reminder that even the smallest piece of evidence can hold the power to solve the greatest mysteries, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, can still be achieved through dedication, persistence, and the unwavering love of families who refuse to let their loved ones be forgotten. Rebecca Walsh's story ends not with her tragic death, but with the knowledge that she is remembered, that justice was served, and that her legacy continues to make a difference in the lives of others. In a small Iowa town where everyone knew everyone, a 20-year-old girl became a symbol of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable bonds that hold communities together in the face of unthinkable tragedy.